And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. So one key tenet of Andrew Cuomo's campaign for governor was a 2% property tax cap. And while he does not take office for another 2 weeks, the battle over this controversial issue has already begun. This week, the State School Boards Association issued a report that details the downfalls of implementing a cap just by itself. And the New York Conference of Mayors held a news conference saying a cap alone would not bring relief to many struggling communities. Tonight, we've assembled a panel of interested parties to weigh in on this issue. Joining us from New York City is Elizabeth Lynham. She is the Deputy Research Director for the Citizens Budget Commission, and she also served as an advisor to the Swazi Commission on Property Tax Relief. Back here in Albany, we are joined by the Mayor of the capital city, Jerry Jennings, and across the table we have Tim Creamer, the Executive Director of the State School Boards Association. Thank you all very much for your time. It's good to see you all.
Thank you.
Elizabeth, I'm going to start with you. If you would just briefly sort of lay out the good part of a property tax cap, why there are people who are proposing it.
Well, it's important to remember that the single most important problem in New York State is high local property taxes and high local taxes. Our local taxes are the highest in the nation by far, and really that is where we see businesses, people having the most impact in leaving the state. So it's important to address those. It's important for the state to take responsibility for addressing those, and not just by capping, but also by implementing other reforms. And the hope is that with the pressures of a cap on cost containment, the communities that could come together for mandate relief and for reform fundamentally will do so, and the state legislature will be more inclined to take them up on those proposals and to actually do the kinds of reforms that need to happen in tandem with the property tax cap.
Okay, so Mayor Jennings, I think that pretty much everyone would agree that property taxes are too damn high.
Too damn high.
Too damn high. Just to quote a person who used to run for governor and is not with us anymore. So what is the problem then with a tax cap, if there is one?
I don't see any problem with tax cap. You know, I've tried for 17 years to keep taxes as low as I possibly could in the city, not compromise delivery of services. It's about time we got real serious about it, Liz. We are not competitive on a global scale. We're not competitive nationally. We need to bring businesses in here, people in here. We have to put our heads together. No one, I think, is going to say, gee, we can't do it together. Individually, you know, people start taking stands, getting parochial. That's going to help destroy what we're trying to do here. And the Governor-elect Cuomo is right. He's saying, all right, I want everyone to work together. So let's all go to the table. Let's sit down. Let's educate our elected officials that are making decisions in Albany that will impact all of us. What will make sure that we don't compromise the services we're delivering, but we are making it more affordable for people. Okay,
but just to play devil's advocate for a second, the lion's share of your revenue comes from property taxes. I mean, that's pretty much where you make your money, is it not?
It is.
So you're not shooting yourself in the foot to say, okay, I agree that there's an arbitrary limit on how much I can raise?
Well, I'd like to have 0%. Okay, and I do think, sure, and I do think that if we get creative here and start looking at things like consolidation, sharing services, you know, there's things in the way legislatively. There are things in the way from people's attitudes, and they have to change. I mean, we're under siege financially as a state. We're compromising delivery of services on all levels, and all the mayors got together to say, okay, we're going to speak as one voice, but we have to be consistent in what we're saying, and we have to make sure that people understand it.
Well, I don't think we've not gotten to full-blown war yet over this issue, but there's a lot of positions and jockeying for position. So, Tim, you guys put out a report, and actually we've got it right here.
Yes.
And it says property tax cap pass or fail for school districts, right? The real issue is that you are concerned. There's a lot of concern, actually. And the main issue, and actually I think that all of you are saying, Elizabeth, you too, is you can't do it in a vacuum. It has to be done part and parcel with other things.
Absolutely. I would agree with both of them. Taxes are too high. It's because our costs are too high. And we looked at just the fact that the property tax funds schools to a great extent. Our biggest budget item is personnel. So we looked at just personnel costs, salaries, health care, pensions, and compared that with what we could raise locally with a cap. We believe we could raise locally about $230 million a year based on what we know we raise now, compared against cost increases for personnel only, closing in on almost $1 billion. We would end up with an average deficit, hole in our budget, of about $800 $815 million a year.
Okay, that's
Compound
a problem,
that
obviously.
year after year after year. Our study went out 4 years, and it came to a point of, if it was a 2% tax cap, a $3.3 billion in just meeting personnel costs only for the next 3 years.
Okay, Elizabeth, when was this Swazi Commission again?
Finished up in December 2008 and delivered the final report to the governor at that point. I think there are ways to design a cap that are intelligent. I mean, if you put no pressure on cost drivers, then they will never come down. So part of the issue is really what kind of disciplinary process can you put in place that will cause people to really control costs. And nothing has worked so far in terms of the, the state legislature, the budget that have been passed have, increased local mandates, if anything.
Right.
So we're at a juncture where we really do have to do something. And a property tax cap, if it's designed well, which is something we tried to study with the Swazi Commission and to make recommendations around. I mean, there are many ways to design it. You can argue about how to do it, but I think it would need to be done intelligently. And you would want to actually consider things like school aid to high-need districts, because you don't want to decimate services, but you want to have the discipline that you need to get those costs down.
Okay, the third rail. That's a good place to start. I mean, before we get there, though, what about the issue of a spending cap? I mean, I'm sure, Tim, you're going to say this is something that you don't want to see. I don't know necessarily that you would want to see it either, Mayor. I mean, what about, Elizabeth, a spending cap? Was it considered? Because I remember in the 06 gubernatorial race, this is something John Faso brought up.
You mean a spending cap at the state level versus the local property tax cap?
Right, that you actually can't cap on schools or in terms of the revenue that comes in unless you say to them you also can't increase costs.
Right.
You open
well,
the door. You open the door to
interplay.
exemptions.
Wait, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tim.
I think you open the door to exemptions. There will be, when you have a spending cap, like a contingency budget cap that you have if you haven't passed your local school district budget. Then you end up having these carve-outs, these things that say, we're going to have a spending cap except for A, B, and C.
Right.
And so I don't think it's an effective way to go.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth, finish
Well,
that thought.
you have it on both. The problem in some cases with both the property tax cap and a spending cap is that you create distortions. So the property tax cap is just as susceptible to carve-outs as a spending cap. So I don't think that's an argument necessarily against a spending cap. I think they both have that problem. And I think that's why you would have to view very suspiciously any property tax cap or spending cap that was, let's say, approved by labor unions that has a lot of carve-outs in the labor area. I mean, the point is that you want to put enough under the cap that there is this discipline and that you cause change to happen. So you don't want to see a lot of exemptions on either side.
And the thing is, causing change to happen is what we're talking about here. You know, you can't balance this budget, the state budget, on the backs of PEF and CSEA. You know, we have organized labor all over the state.
Oh, I don't know that the governor-elect would agree with you on that particular point.
No, I don't believe that you can do that with just two major state unions. I think everyone has to come to the table. We have to talk about how do we make sure that people aren't losing their jobs, we're not compromising delivery of services, and how do we do it intelligently? How do we share service? How do I work with school districts to help eliminate some of their costs and do a more effective job so that it keeps the taxes down? See, school districts, they do their own taxing in my city. We run our tax rate.
Sure.
Okay, it's time to evaluate how that function has taken place for years, because there's a lot of disparity between and amongst districts and cities and governments. We have to sit down and be real about sharing some of the costs here.
Okay.
Does it make sense for my plows not to plow the city schools when they're out 24/7?
No. But here's another problem. I mean, I think we're all sort of dancing around it a little bit, and I think Elizabeth touched on it. There's two major problems. One is the issue of hold harmless, the issue of how aid is allocated, in that rich districts are getting aid, and districts perhaps like urban districts like Albany. And then there's, of course, the charter school problem that I don't know that we necessarily want to touch on here. But there's a question of how aid is allocated. And then the other question is the political will and really what the teachers union is going to do.
Right. I know that the things that the teachers union have objected to, for example, are found in both our report and in the mayor's report. One of the things that would have an immediate impact would be a statewide freeze on all public employees' wages. That's going to be really controversial. I don't know if the political will is there, but if you're looking for a big immediate impact to meet $9 billion deficit in the coming year. That's one of the things you at least have to consider. And I'm hoping that Governor-elect Cuomo looks at this proposal for a tax cap as also an opportunity to think through some fundamental cost drivers, like health care contributions, like pension costs,
right,
like some other things, Triborough Amendment, and other things that we've talked about for years. Maybe the time has come. Maybe we're at an intersection where we actually can make some progress on these issues.
Elizabeth, you use the word pressure twice now. I mean, is the idea that you use the cap, perhaps even if you enact it in a vacuum, to then subsequently try and push through other reforms, but maybe not necessarily all at the same time?
Yes, I mean, part of the issue is that we've known that we need to change, let's say, the Wicks law, which causes a lot of public contracts to be more costly. And yet, as groups go to Albany, cities and all the localities, school districts, et cetera, people are fighting for their own particular piece of the pie. Whereas if you had a cap, maybe we would get a concerted community together who could stand up together and say, look, we need these fundamental reforms. If you're going to make us live under a cap, then you also need to do something for us to help us out to actually get under the cap. So I think that's very important in terms of the actual dynamic of how you might see some of these things pass through. The other thing I have to sort of disrespectfully agree with Mayor Jennings on is that a lot of talk about consolidation. Consolidation will not do it for you. You know, you look at the studies that have been done on government consolidation, and it's a very popular issue right now. You know, there's savings in the 2 to 5% range if everything goes well. So, you know, when you need to get savings, as Tim said, about, you know, the $9 billion mark, you got to go to labor. Labor is 70% of the school district budget. You know, it's a big component of everything that happens there. So you're not going to be able to really address the problems without labor.
I agree with you on that, but what I'm saying is that we shouldn't have a county government, a school district, and a city government operating independently. We should be working together to look at how do we do cost savings so we don't compromise the programs that our kids are getting. And as far as I'm concerned, the urban template or the template on urban education has to be thoroughly evaluated. Suburbia has significant issues that they have to deal with. Urban education has the same thing. Let's review it. We haven't changed it in years. And for years and years, the legislature will sit there and say, okay, we're cutting your AIM spending this year by 5%. In the last 3 years, we've lost $8 million I've had to make up just because they've made decisions they want to save some money for the state. It's only going to get worse before it gets better. So get everyone in the room and say, how do we do this? How do we get it done?
Liz, if there's one thing I could say is we're talking about this as if it's a fait accompli.
Right.
And I'm hoping that we also recognize that if a tax cut comes through, that it could have a devastating impact on jobs. We could be losing lots and lots and lots of jobs. And this is at a time when we already got high unemployment throughout this state. It really has to be thought through very, very carefully.
Okay, unfortunately also we are out of time, but this is obviously an issue that is a hot button issue. It's going to be going on throughout the rest of the year, and I want to thank all three of you, Mayor Jennings, Elizabeth Lynham, thank you, and also Tim Creamer. We're going to be having you guys all back, perhaps not in this configuration, but again through the years. Maybe we'll have a whole table on consolidation, so you and Elizabeth can just fight it out.
No, we're not fighting. Elizabeth and I agree.
Thank you very much, you guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Liz. Thanks.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Take care.